Hi, I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread. I'm coming to you from the Hance Auditorium in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've held the last 4 bread symposiums, and as you can see, there's nobody here but me. And this is where we usually have it. The seats are all empty because this year, thanks to you, the symposium will be presented online, virtually, in our new presentation hall, which is where I will join you in just a minute. Thank you, and thanks for being part of our new virtual Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Welcome again. Throughout the entire symposium, I'll be thanking our generous sponsors over and over again, and ask that you do as well by visiting their booths and pavilions in the exhibitor hall. There you will see lots of bonus content, and you can also make appointments to meet with the folks from these companies that serve our baking community so well. Our presenting sponsor is Puratos, who has partnered with us from the very beginning for all of our symposiums, and it is their support that helped us get this one-of-a-kind gathering of thought leaders off the ground. Please also visit our fabulous flour and milling sponsors, Ardent Mills, Lindley Mills, and Central Milling. Thank you also to our equipment sponsors, the WP Bakery Group and Allied Bakery and Food Service Equipment. And thank you also to our specialty food product companies, Probiotine, Fire Within, Big Green Egg, and Mock Mill. Please check out all of their booths to learn about their wonderful and unique products. And also thanks to our media sponsors, Cook's Country, The Local Palate, the James Beard Foundation, and the Bread Bakers Guild of America. You'll be hearing more about all of them throughout the entire series of presentations. So again, thank you to all our sponsors. At the end of today's presentation, you will also see our credit scroll, thanking all of the people behind the scenes who made this event possible, including our production and technical partner, Ganoid Communications, our creative team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University, our hosts for this, our 4th annual gathering. So stick around, if you will. But now, it's time to get things rolling with today's presentation, so let's go live. And once again, welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. And welcome again. Hello, hello, hello. Today is Wednesday. It's hard to believe we're into the heart of September, and the symposium just continues to roll on. We've got an interesting presentation for you today, all about upcycling and things that are good for the earth, good grains that are good for us and good for the planet. And before I introduce our panelists, let me make our usual and quick announcements. Next week, we have on Monday a panel with Mark Vetri, who many of you know either through his restaurants or as having seen him on the Food Network, and the author of a number of books, along with his co-author, David Joachim, who will be there, as well as their baker, Claire Kopp McWilliams, and they'll be talking about Mastering Bread, their new book, and some of the things that they've discovered about working with bolted flour. We'll also have next Wednesday, we'll have Patricia Kennedy of the WP Bakery Group, who's back again to talk about the equipment, the technology and equipment of the future. And the following week, we have a change. So make note of this. And we've already changed it on our homepage. We're flipping the days. Nancy Silverton was scheduled for Monday, September 20th. And we're moving her, and she's moving over to September 22nd. And Terry Coletto, who was scheduled for the 22nd, is going to go on Monday, the 20th. So on the 20th of September, we'll have a demonstration class by Terry Coletto on focaccia gardens, which is a big phenomenon around the world right now. She's going to show us how it's done and how she's become a major player in that realm. And then on Wednesday, we'll be having a conversation with the great Nancy Silverton and hearing all about both her vision for bread, but we'll get a chance to hear her whole story. So we've got all that coming, and then beyond that, we've got plenty of other presentations. Just continue to go back to the homepage and check the scrolling calendar to see what's coming up next. And also, if you haven't yet signed all the guest books in the sponsor booths, please do so. If you do sign all 10 of the guest books, that makes you eligible to go on the spinning wheel. And at the end of the month, we're going to spin it again and give out another really nice bread knife from one of our sponsors. Where is it? Let me pull the knife up. This is from Henkel's, Zwilling Henkel's. Henkel's used to be its own company. Zwilling kind of bought them and owns a number of really great food product brands. So they've donated a couple of knives for us to give away. And we'll be putting that up on the wheel in just a couple of weeks. And I think that's all the preliminary. So let's just dive right in. We've got standing by, we've got Daniel Kurzrock of ReGrain. We have Michael Gleason of the Puratos Innovation Lab. And we have Diane Walters from Everspring. And Diane wasn't on she's a late addition to our panel here, and I'm excited to hear about what she has to share with us today. I know that some of it will include sprouting, which is a big thing on my list. So, but before any of them join us, we're going to show a video that they made. And after that, they will join us live and we'll get into Q&A and other presentation stuff. So go ahead and Gurmit, let's run the video.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on grains, good for you, good for the planet. My name's Mike Gleason. I am the product manager for bakery ingredients at Puratos. And I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Diane Walters and Daniel Kurzrock from Everspring and ReGrain. And today we're really excited to share with you a lot of the trends we see around grains and their influence on the baking industry, and some of the unique technologies that we think are going to shape and influence the future of baking. Now, when it comes to consumer trends, one of the things that Puratos looks into is global research. And we have our global research study called Taste Tomorrow, where we interview consumers from all around the world. And some of the big findings that we took coming away from that research was that consumers are looking for healthier, fresher, tastier breads that are more natural, and going back to this idea of more the craftsmanship of baking. And when it comes to health specifically, what we find is that health is about less things as well as adding more things at the same time. So consumers said that 72% think health is about removing ingredients that are bad for them, while 66% say it's more about adding ingredients that are good for them. And some of these things that we're removing are things like calories, fat, sugar, salt. But some of the things that we're adding are more around fiber, whole grains, and some of that protein content, and power ingredients like ancient grains and seeds with higher fiber and protein content. And we know that whole grains have significant health benefits for consumers. If we look, just 3 to 6 servings a day can help by reducing risk of certain cancers, heart disease, and diabetes. It can also help to lower cholesterol and blood pressure, improve your overall digestive health, and actually control maintaining a healthy weight, so that the fiber and the satiation that you get from eating more whole grains. But when it comes to actual grain consumption, what we see is that consumers are eating plenty of grains, but they're just not the right types of grains. So we'll see that the average refined grain intake is sometimes 5, 6, 7 times as much as the actual whole grain content that's consumed by consumers. And the FDA actually recommends that we keep that consumption level more towards a 50-50 balance. So 50% coming from refined grains, and at least 50% coming from whole grain intake. The good news is that we don't need to convince consumers that grains are good for them. If we look from our research from around the world, we see that 84% of consumers feel that fiber in whole grain is actually healthy for them. And When we look in North America, we see similar numbers with about 82% of consumers seeing that fiber and whole grain is good for them. And the other benefit is that consumers actually see a lot of these whole grains and grains and seeds as not only being a tasty ingredient, but also healthy as well. So on our taste to health ratio, which we developed from our consumer research studies, we see that about 80%, more than 80% of consumers think that whole grain and grains and seeds are healthy for them. And at the same time, over 60% of those consumers see them as a tasty ingredient when incorporated into bread items. Now with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my first colleague, Diane, to talk a little bit about sprouting and how that's changing the industry of the baking.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to speak with you all today. My name is Diane Walters, and I oversee our product development team here at Everspring Farms. Everspring is a family-owned and operated company based in Ontario, Canada, and one of our specialties is producing sprouted grain, seeds, flakes, and flours. I'm excited to talk to you today about sprouted grains, and in particular, how they enhance the nutritional potential of grains while also improving their taste and texture. Most of you are likely familiar with sprouted grains as they've become increasingly more common in food products, particularly in baked goods. However, you may not know that despite their resurgence over the last decade, sprouted grains are actually a very important ancient food preparation technique practiced in cultures all around the world. Often used in conjunction with fermentation, the soaking and sprouting of grains was used by Chinese medicine practitioners to treat ailments like scurvy on long sea voyages thousands of years ago. In Russia, traditional folk recipes called for oat porridge to be sprouted and lightly fermented to allow for the predigestion of the oat and to increase beneficial bacteria. Interestingly, our grandparents likely consumed sprouted grains quite frequently in the days before highly mechanized farming. Back then, grain often sprouted naturally in the field before it could be harvested and stored. It's only been recently that we have almost completely eliminated sprouted grains from our diet. Sprouted grains are any whole grains that have been germinated in a controlled environment, typically for no more than 48 hours. The germination process is halted by either drying, cooking, or freezing the grains. In their natural form, all whole grains are made up of three main components: the bran, the outer layer of the seed, the endosperm, the white starchy bit on the inside, and the germ, which is the small but mighty nutritional heart of the seed. In wheat, for example, the germ only makes up about 3% of the weight of the seed, but it's a concentrated source of several essential nutrients, including vitamin E, folate, phosphorus, thiamine, zinc, and magnesium, as well as fiber and essential fatty acids. The germ is also what powers the germination process. The process of germination involves soaking seeds in water and allowing them to germinate naturally in optimal conditions within a controlled environment. This process transforms the seed as a whole host of biochemical reactions, kickstart enzyme production, which act almost like keys that unlock the true nutritional potential of the seed. You could spend a lifetime studying the biochemistry of seeds, and there's still much we don't know. But what we do know is that enzymes activated during germination, such as amylase and protease, convert complex protein and starch molecules into easier to digest components. This process is sometimes referred to as a predigestion process because these enzymes do the hard work of breaking down these molecules for us so that our digestive systems can get right to work at extracting the important nutrients from our food. This also might be why some people who have difficulty digesting regular grains and baked goods find that consuming the sprouted versions are much easier to digest. Another important aspect of sprouting is that sprouted grains are widely considered to improve the bioavailability of grains. This means that the nutrients from a sprouted seed are more easily digested by our bodies. All seeds contain something called nutrient inhibitors, One of the most prevalent is called phytic acid. Nutrient inhibitors bind to nutrients in the seed and prevent them from being released before growing conditions are optimal. When the germination process begins, enzymes like phytase are activated, which degrade phytate and release important minerals like phosphorus, magnesium, and iron for absorption by our bodies. Now that we've talked about sort of the interesting nutritional changes that happen during sprouting, you're probably wondering, what impact does sprouting have on the taste and texture of grains and seeds? Well, in general, sprouting can improve the taste and flavor profile of many grains and seeds. During germination, a number of structural changes occur, producing delightful textures and complex flavors. Cereal grains such as sprouted brown rice, oats, emmer, barley, and wheat have a soft, chewy, and delicate texture when cooked. Other seeds, like buckwheat and millet, become light and crunchy after germination, which makes them perfect as bread toppers. As I mentioned earlier, the germination process activates amylase, which breaks up complex carbohydrates into easier to digest sugars. This also makes the sprouted grains taste slightly sweeter. These changes also seem to have an impact on the complexity of the flavors. For example, a sprouted flax powder has a sweeter, nuttier, and more complex taste and depth of flavor than a regular flax powder. For pseudo-cereals such as quinoa, the soaking and germination process removes any bitterness caused by naturally occurring saponins. One of the challenges in using whole grain flour is that it contains the germ, which is loaded with essential but pretty unstable fatty acids. These fatty acids can oxidize and then go rancid, resulting in an off-flavor flour. One of the fascinating things about sprouting is the germination process prevents these fatty acids from oxidizing, meaning that the sprouted whole grain flour has a minimum shelf life of 12 months, and our own real-time shelf life studies have shown sprouted wheat flour that was milled 2 years ago has still not gone rancid. This is a huge benefit to bakeries who would like to take advantage of the nutritional benefits of a whole grain flour, but struggle with the logistics of a short shelf life of typical whole grain flours. Now, even though sprouting is an ancient food preparation technique, it's important that we develop ways to produce these products sustainably for future generations to continue to enjoy. At Everspring, we're committed to environmental sustainability, and we've established some sustainability goals for this decade to reduce our environmental impact throughout our business. We are currently exploring alternate technologies to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels during processing, with the ultimate goal of becoming carbon neutral in our manufacturing plants by 2030. To reduce our water consumption, we've designed our sprouting system to utilize a smart soak technique, which significantly reduces the amount of water required for the germination process. Instead of a steep and drain method, we soak each variety of seed in the optimal amount of water required to germinate. Therefore, we use no more water than is absolutely required. To reduce our contribution to landfill, all of our food waste is composted and used as fertilizer on local farms. All cardboard and paper and most of our incoming packaging material is also recycled after use. We are continually working on improving and strengthening our supply chain for the grains and seeds we use in our operations. We source our cereal grains from North America and have developed wonderful partnerships with farmers all over Canada and the US. While we work with both organic and conventional grains and seeds, the vast majority of our raw materials are grown organically with no chemical inputs. And we have recently started a couple partnerships with farmers who are using regenerative agriculture to grow their crops. Regenerative farming practices encompass a really wide variety of sustainable agriculture techniques, but they are all generally focused on strengthening the health and vitality of farm soil and ecosystems. So far, we are sourcing hulless oats and buckwheat from regenerative farms this year and hope to source more grains as more farmers convert their operations to these kinds of regenerative practices. That about wraps up my portion of this presentation. I'm going to pass it to Dan to talk about some of their really innovative technologies. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have afterwards.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Kurzrock. I'm the co-founder and Chief Grain Officer of ReGrain. Pleased to be with you here today alongside Puratos to talk about future-proofing the baking industry through upcycling. Upcycling is all about bridging the gap between the #1 solution to climate change and a for-profit innovation opportunity for businesses. I wish all solutions to climate change met this criteria. Upcycling is part of a rare breed and is something that I'm thrilled to share a bit more with you about today. A bit about ReGrain. We are an ingredient platform for upcycled foods. What we're all about doing is creating nutritious, sustainable innovations that really unlock some of the latent value that is really hiding in plain sight in our food system. And I'll share a bit more with you soon about what that looks like. Together with Puratos, we've focused on developing some innovations that are healthy and plant-based and sustainable, really checking those boxes for what the modern consumer is looking for, with applications across the bakery segment as well as patisserie. Taking a step back, food waste is a global problem that hopefully all of you have heard about today. We won't go into too much detail here, but in broad strokes, we waste about 40% of all food that's grown. That's the equivalent of leaving a grocery store with 5 bags and dropping 2 in the parking lot. And embedded in that waste is lots of wasted resources and cost, and most importantly, opportunity to do more with less. Upcycling is all about identifying sources for ingredients that would have otherwise not gone to human consumption and putting them to higher use. So this is the circular economy for food. It is a term that we borrowed from other aspects of sustainability, textiles and others, and have helped apply to the food system. Co-founded the Upcycled Food Association, which actually now has a certification that launched in June for upcycled foods specifically. Now, here, all food industry veterans, you might be thinking to yourself, upcycling, that's kind of a new term maybe, but a pretty old idea. You're absolutely right. You could argue that pickles, are an upcycled product. Any value-added processing, jam and jelly, ways to seal the seasons, right? This is really a very old idea that we're shedding a new light on. One of my favorite examples to bring up is an analog from the dairy industry. From cheese processing, you have whey, of course, as a byproduct. Whey is something that the dairy industry used to have a tough time getting rid of sustainably and profitably. Now there's a huge market for whey protein, so much so that there are some whey processors where cheese is the byproduct, right? So it's really flipped back, the other direction. What we're doing with ReGrain and our approach to upcycled foods is identifying overlooked and undervalued supply chains that are really hiding in plain sight. Our first commercial focus has been on what we call Super Grain Plus, which is made from grain that the commercial brewing industry has extracted the sugars from to produce beer, which left us all the fiber and protein. I discovered this actually as a home brewer where I was making beer every week. I was trying to figure out what to do with my own waste stream, and I would actually make bread, was the first product, and would sell the bread to friends in order to buy more ingredients to brew more beer for free. And now we're doing this at obviously a much more commercial scale with partners like Puratos. We've done this by developing some unique technology that is energy efficient, food safe, in a really novel way to capture this potential waste stream and turn it into something that's a usable, functional ingredient for the food industry. It's very nutritious. I mentioned that all the fiber and protein is what's left behind. It has, about 3.5 times the fiber of whole wheat. It's got about twice the protein of oats, a protein level much more similar to an almond. It's got prebiotic properties. There's a lot of health benefits that have been well documented in the literature, over the years. It just hasn't really been practical before ReGrain to bring these to market because the infrastructure to actually process the ingredients didn't exist. Here you can see a more visual depiction of the nutrition ReGrains at the bottom. You can see protein level of about an almond, tremendous amounts of dietary fiber. And from a functional perspective, it not only tastes great, but actually can help with, in application, provide things like water holding and oil binding and thickening, depending on the application. And so what we're all about doing is, a little bit about our process. We work directly with commercial breweries and we create SuperGrain Plus using our patented technology, and that can then be turned into finished goods as a hero inclusion. So here we have an artisanal bread made by our friends at Puratos. This is at about a 15% inclusion, really beautiful loaf, has some really nice malty flavor notes, real toothsome texture, really fantastic application in bread. Fun concept here, this has 2 layers. We've got an ice cream that's actually using ReGrain in the base to add some pastry notes to the, it's actually a vegan ice cream flavor in this case, and then it's topped on a banana bread. And so both the banana bread and the ice cream also use roasted bananas, which were upcycled from waste streams as well. But that a 3rd layer here, this is a super stacked concept. This is a burger where ReGrain is used in the burger bun. We're also in the sauce on there as a natural thickener to replace a modified starch, as well as in the protein system as a binder extender. So these applications for SuperGrain Plus are many and broad in scope, from savory to sweet. If you can name it, we've probably ReGrained it. And we're getting really great feedback from the industry, including our friend Peter Reinhardt. He's been a big fan of working with the ingredient. I'm sure he'd be happy to share some comments on how to think about using it, as well as other chefs and professional food scientists who are putting this to work in their own product development and innovation programs. This is a platform that is at the intersection of health and sustainability. And one of the ways to think about this is as a platform for communicable sustainability. So this is an ingredient that reduces the demand on virgin resources and can actually be connected to a lower environmental footprint. One of the clearest ways to think about that is water footprint. We're talking about a crop that has already used over 300 gallons of water in the production of beer making. That's already been expended. And so as we're upcycling it, we've got a new supply chain that actually has a water footprint of 0. We are extending this approach to other supply chains from food and beverage processors. So we can use our technology and our know-how to take the oats, for example, from oat-based milk, and really almost we're just hyper obsessed with identifying these overlooked and undervalued supply chains from food and beverage processors, juice pulp, and more. There's a lot hiding in plain sight here that we can put through the ReGrain platform to create new upcycled food ingredients. From a consumer perspective, this concept of upcycling has really taken off over the last few years. It's got a really large market size, and folks are responding really positively to buying more products that are made using upcycled ingredients. And the new upcycled certification that I was referencing earlier is an important part of that. And this is threading the needle for them between the health-related benefits that they're looking for and the environmental impact that consumers are hoping to have. Whole Foods in 2021 actually named upcycled foods as a top 10 trend. ReGrain was called out specifically. This is something that is an important part of the future of food. And we'd love to continue the conversation, with Puratos and you about what upcycling can do for your business, how it can fit in, and would love to continue to share some of our our insights and our ideas. And really appreciate your time. For more information, here's a few websites you can go to. Upcycledfoods.com is ReGrain's B2B site, and really just a pleasure to be here with Peter Reinhardt, and the man who I actually learned to bake bread from originally, and Puratos, one of the leaders in bakery innovation. So it's a real pleasure, and hope to chat as close to live as we can in this day and age from here. So don't just think about it, as I like to say, chew on it. Cheers, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Dan and Diane, for sharing a lot more about your companies today. Thank you again for everybody for joining, and I hope you stick around and have some questions for us. Thank you. Back to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Michael and Dan and Diane. It was a great video. First of all, loaded with information, And I think interesting enough, this far along into the symposium, some of these topics have been touched on in earlier presentations, but now this was a way to kind of like build upon and amplify, dare I say it, but upcycle it a little bit, and get it to the next level. And I think a good idea is, take a while to kind of tip over. And I just think, I remember when I first met you, Dan, a number of years ago at one of the gatherings, as bread or pizza gathering or somewhere, and ReGrain was just sort of getting off the ground. And Diane, I haven't met you before, but what you're doing with sprouting is something that's been a fascination of mine for, well, frankly, for 50 years. But really, we thought, when I first discovered sprouting, I thought this is going to change the world tomorrow. And it takes time for these things to, like really get hold. So let me just start by throwing a question out to the group. And then I want to open up anybody who's watching, please feel free to use the Q&A to put questions up for the group. And we'll see if we can go even deeper into this. But my question is Puratos is a big company, not originally known for this aspect, for what I'll call the sustainability. Well, sustainability is a big part of your work now, but it's not the brand that Puratos is known for. But now you're moving more into that. So what is it that you guys are doing, and what drew you to work with both Everspring and ReGrain as you're moving forward into what we've been calling the future of bread?
Yeah, and that's something that we say at Puratos is the future of bread lies in its past, and that's something that's deep at everything that we do in Puratos. And as Diane mentioned, sprouting it's a really ancient technique. So as we grew as a company, we started to look towards the past for inspiration. And sprouting is one of the things we came across, along with sourdough, which we built into the sourdough library at this point. So we wanted to work with people who are experts in this field. So Puratos does a lot with grains, but sprouting is a very specific and unique process. And Everspring has a lot of great technologies that really stood out to us. So that's kind of what took us from the past to the future, and now kind of looking forward. That's where Dan and his company ReGrain really come in, to see not only how can we deliver these great ancient techniques. Sprouting is involved in brewing, as most of you know, but how can we now combine that in a more sustainable, environmentally friendly way? And I think Dan's company's done a great job of answering that question with upcycling.
Thanks, and I'll just add quickly on that. The future lies in the past with this too. We got a new name with upcycling for what we're doing to help communicate what this means for the world. But not wasting is ancient human wisdom too, right? And it's we've been making beer as long as we've been making bread forever, right? As a civilization. And you talk to any trained chef, and probably many of the people that are in the audience here, you waste not, want not, right? And we're just trying to introduce some new ways to take that old wisdom and apply it to some areas that maybe have been overlooked as things have gotten industrialized over the years.
And I know that as a baker, I'm always the phrase I use for my students to help them understand what they're about to enter into when they learn how to bake is, and that the mission of the baker is to evoke the full potential of flavor trapped in the grain. And you said something. One of you said something in one of your presentations about the same idea that your goal is to evoke the full nutritional and sustainability potential in these grains, so that by not wasting and finding new uses and upcycled uses for either spent grains or by sprouting grains and getting more potential nutrition out of them, or whatever it is that you're doing with them, you are evoking a fuller potential in those things. And that seems like that. And again, it's like a no-brainer. It makes so much practical sense when you talk about it. What are you seeing right now in terms of the trend from where we were a few years ago? A lot of the concepts you talked about today, while they've been with us for millenniums, are really, to the general public, brand new ideas. And now suddenly these new ideas, which people hardly heard of a few years ago, are now becoming mainstream. But where's it going in terms of, like you said, as a tremendous economic opportunity as well as a sustainability opportunity?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Diane.
I was just going to say on the sprouting aspect of it, like you said, it's been around for thousands of years in various forms and cultures all over the world, which is fascinating. And we're sort of just, I guess, rediscovering that. And I liked what you said about sort of extracting the true value out of the grain, because I think there's a really nice synergy between what we do and sort of trying to extract the full nutritional potential of these super important food products, and with what Daniel does in after we sort of use these products, how we can sort of extract those benefits on the other side. So, but the sprouting, it's fascinating that, you know, a traditional food preparation technique is now expanding, going much more mainstream, and it's sort of finding its way into a whole variety of food products. And Michael, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, I was just going to say, and I know from the sprouting industry, if you think about where a lot of it came from, a lot of it was animal feed at some points too. And it's something that people knew that was a great way to make those nutritional elements more available. And now it's positioned and it's moved away from that to the point where now we're incorporating sprouted grains into products that are seen as very, very high-end, very premium items. So it's kind of turned the concept of sprouted grains being a simple source of nutrition into something that can be a really high value-added ingredient.
Well, what about the growth in these sectors? So, Diane, how long has Everspring been in this sort of sprouted grains business, and how's your growth evolving?
Yeah, so we actually started many years ago, 30 years ago, and we were in the animal feed side for quite a while, and not doing exactly what we do now. We were taking the sprouting process quite a bit further. So, but we did start in that phase, and then it grew very organically. We just started getting requests. So about 10 years ago, we opened a dedicated facility to do the spreaded grains. And we focus mostly on doing ingredients. So we do the spreaded grain ingredients, spreaded flours and stuff that then get sold to other companies, you know, like someone like Puratos, and then they use it in a super wide variety of things. So yeah, it's still growing, and it's still finding its way into really interesting new applications, which is exciting to see.
Yeah, you know, one of our sponsors of the symposium has a similar journey too. They started out in animal feed, and we're talking about probiotin, and they realized that what they were creating for animals, you know, had tremendous human potential, as well. And so they went into new facilities that were, quote, human grade, certified.
Yeah, exactly.
Now making snack products and mixes and things like that as prebiotics, and really focusing on the prebiotic aspect of that, which obviously is some of the things that you're doing, and then the parallels kind of what ReGrain is doing as well, in the sense that they're using essentially spent grain. They're spending the grain into new products. You're taking products from the beer industry, which I think obviously is maybe the most well-known aspect of what you're doing, and with upcycling, because there's such a surplus of spent grain. How many billions of pounds did you say there is out there of grain that's it wasn't necessarily going totally to waste. It was going to animal feed mostly, I would think, if it wasn't being thrown out. But how's that growing now as an industry? And then how does it spun off into some other upcycled products that you mentioned in your presentation?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, continuing the thread of discovering that there might be a better use for some of these things than animal feed. Brewer's grain is, we think of it as as a co-product, not a byproduct of beer production. As I was mentioning in the presentation, I started as a home brewer, and I learned there that's like 1 pound of grain for every 6-pack of beer. It's about 20 billion pounds in the industry, and the brewing process is extracting the starch effectively, converting it into sugars to then be fermented to become beer, and that process of by virtue of that extraction is actually concentrating the protein and the fiber and the byproduct. But the challenge historically has been the brewing process is kind of like making a big batch of oatmeal or something. You make a mash. using hot water, mixing it in with the grains. And so what comes out is very prone to spoiling, very quickly. It's difficult to handle safely and to process efficiently. And so that was one of the big first things we, had to discover to make this a viable solution is, hey, how can we create a human grade, ingredient to preserve the nutritional value here? It's got some great flavor. Peter, as you know, from having worked with it, a number of times, and it's just very versatile. But that higher value, it's not about, we're not saying, hey, this is, we're taking this stuff out of landfill destination. Fortunately, in most of the U.S., at least, that's not the case. Internationally, it's actually a bit different. But we're proposing a higher use. Let's feed people, right? And this was an idea that, while it resonates, on a very kind of fundamental level with a lot of people, as making sense. Was new, for the food industry. It's the material is called spent grain is the technical term, and it's not spent, right? That's our whole, what we're trying to shift the perception around. It's a misnomer. It's super, right? We're trying to be cute and talk about it in that way. And when we first started doing this,
the perception.
Exactly. And, now you fast forward, this was 2010, 2011, when we, came up with the idea and started working on it, which is a short amount of time by, you're looking at our history compared to a company like Puratos, right? But, this idea has really caught on tremendously in the last year and a half, especially. I actually co-founded this nonprofit called the Upcycled Food Association with some other peers and, in the industry, actually some competitors too. It's a kind of consortium of companies that are trying to create a rising tide for awareness around, upcycled foods and their potential. And one of the big turning points was that certification that I was mentioning in the presentation too. And since all that has come about, what we're seeing now increasingly is companies coming to us with an elevated understanding of what upcycling is, looking for this as an attribute in the products that they're looking to develop. It's not always the reason for purchase for the end consumer, but it sure as heck is a reason for loyalty, right? So create a great tasting product that's got better for you attributes. And oh, by the way, this is also a more sustainable option. It kind of creates that win-win. And so we've been seeing steady growth since we started the company, but in the last, I would say year and a half, 2 years, we're starting to hit that first kind of big tipping point, I think, with more mass, understanding and awareness of this.
Well, you mentioned competition, and I think that is an indicator. Without competition, it's hard to grow a new category. If you're the only player in the game, people don't take it as seriously. But the fact that there are other people jumping into it, it's a sign, number one, that it has traction and that it's making sense to more than just me and you. And so how is that growing? Is the category itself, if it's large enough to be an association, how many players are there in this now?
Yeah,
that's going to drive this tipping point.
Yeah, there's about 200 member businesses now in the association, including large corporations like Mondelez and Dole and US Foods. I mean, what's interesting about upcycling is it's not just about grain for brewing; it's also surplus, fruit and veg from overproduction or cosmetic imperfections or different aspects of that. There's supply chains that have been developed around the fruit from cacao, right, and from the fruit from the coffee plant too, right? And so there's a lot of these different types of supply chains that are kind of thematically aligned with this idea of upcycling, and the membership is growing a lot. But what's nice is that it's not just about upcycling, specifically that we're tapping into. It's this trend towards better for you and better for the planet. That this is a platform in order for people to achieve that. It's not the only one. Regenerative agriculture is super important. Sprouted grains are also very exciting. So there's it's kind of part of this, I guess, broader consciousness around what the future of food needs to look like, and upcycling seems to have a pretty big role to play in that, which is why we get up every day and do what we do.
Yeah, and here's a real practical question that came in that specific to what you do is how does hop inclusion affect the taste of the ReGrain flour that you're making?
Yeah, great question. So no hops at all. So hops are added in the beer making process to the liquid that is extracted basically from the grain. So you get this, it's called wort. It's a sugar, basically like a sugar water, made from the malted barley. And that gets boiled, in the brewing process. And then hops are added throughout that boil and sometimes during fermentation as well, which, creates, for beer making, it adds a lot of flavor. It also is a natural preservative. The original like India Pale Ales, IPAs, they added more hops so that they could survive the journey from England to India, right? So that's like the role that hops play in beer making. We're get involved much earlier in the process from where that liquid is being separated from the solids. And so what we're picking up is 100%, it can be 100% barley. A lot of times brewers will use, some wheat or some rye, some of the more macro brew. We don't work with the corn and the rice and those types of lower cost adjuncts in our product, but that's also used in the beer, brewing industry. And that's, there's a separation of liquid from solid and hops are added to the liquid, and we're involved with this.
That's interesting. So the question about wort is basically that's not even part of the mix that you've gotten your grain, your used grain is pulled out before the hops are added.
Yeah, we pick it up, piping hot and fresh from the brewery, at that point in the process. And then our system is designed to be able to be deployed actually at a brewery itself. So, there'll kind of be this like parallel process to the beer making process, which is where hops and then eventually yeast is the final ingredient that's added to beer making.
So let me ask the same question to you, Diana. How much growth are you seeing from an economic standpoint now? Where is it going and how fast is it getting there?
It's a great question. I can say since I've been involved, which is 10, 11 years now, we've been growing every single year. So in terms of customers, volumes, new product applications, it's continuing to grow. We're seeing just recently in the last year, a lot of growth in legumes. So plant-based protein space, using sprouting to try and maximize the protein, get the full amino acid profile of these plant-based proteins, legumes, beans, lentils, that kind of thing. We've also seen a lot of movement into pet food, believe it or not. Again, pet owners are interested in
healthy food for their pets.
Exactly, yeah, all different kinds of applications. So yeah, it's exciting, lots of new stuff. And we love hearing from the customers. We like to work really closely with them to try and understand like what exactly they're going to be doing and how we can tailor our processing, because we do have a lot of flexibility in what we do. So we try and tailor our processing to sort of meet the exact needs of the customer and the types of application, because the applications are so varied. It's not, we do a lot of bakery, but there's other things too. So
yeah. Well, I know that ever since we've started these bread symposiums, there's always been one track that includes sprouted grains. And we've had, as I said, earlier presentations. We've had some presentations from Lindley Mills and Richard Miskovich and others who were doing sprouted stuff. Even Central Milling is doing their work with sprouted grains as well. So it seems like there is more traction, more players in the category. And the nice thing about doing an event every year like ours is you can begin to see a little bit of the trend arrows. Like is it something that really does have traction, or is it just something that's a blip on the screen? And it seems like more and more the sprouted category is not going away; it's only getting bigger. And I'm guessing the same is true with the upcycling side of things. Is that this is the potential for growth in both of these categories is, number one, you're just scratching the surface at this point, but then it's still happening. One question came is there going to be enough leftover grain left for the animals if you turn it all into flour and use it for human consumption? Is there enough to go around, I guess is the question. I think today, yes, but I think that was the question that came up. What you answered that? I think you typed an answer to them. What was your response to that question?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and maybe at some point there will be that tipping point. Today there's a surplus, across the board. The official line is that about 80% of brewers' grain ends up in animal feed destinations. What we're seeing is an increase in urbanization of breweries too, with the boom in craft beer. There was I don't know what this post-COVID stats are on this, but pre-COVID, it was around 2 new breweries that were opening per day across the country. Think about that for a second. 2 new breweries, per day. Many of them in cities. There's, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area where, the ranching community, has options that are a lot closer than driving across a bridge and dealing with an urban environment to pick up their grain. And there's more breweries in neighborhoods here, and that's true in a lot of places. And so, there may be a point where I doubt it though. Actually, it's about £1 for every 6-pack, as I was mentioning. Even a small brewery, millions of pounds per year. I mean, there's just an astronomical quantity.
More means more grain, and which means more opportunity for.
Yeah, and every time beer is brewed, this is created. But you look at analogs like like whey, as I was mentioning in my presentation. There's in some cases now you have whey producers where cheese is the byproduct. That's not the majority of whey production, but that's the case. There's chemical companies now where paper is the byproduct, jumping over to a different industry. You can look at things like biodiesel, right? And restaurant oil, and there's as markets are very dynamic, right? And markets aren't the solution for everything, and they're actually the cause of the problems for a lot of things. But it's it'll be interesting to see as we continue to build the market for upcycled ingredients and for brewers grain specifically, what impact that has on the actual available supply chain. But the short answer is probably that there's enough to go around for everyone.
But then Puratos comes into it, a big company that a lot of throughput of ingredients that go through you. What do you see how your company is going to be utilizing some of these new ingredients? Not new.
And it's actually interesting to see how it's evolved, and I think we've all kind of touched on it. But I really think there was this movement from very niche product categories, and thinking sprouting specifically was seen as very much sort of like a health specific product. It was kind of pigeonholed into that area, and I think upcycling being associated with sustainability, that wasn't something that was massively marketed 10 years ago. But now there's been this explosion, especially in areas like the commercial aisle, where now sprouting is pretty much everywhere, and you can have sprouting incorporated into an everyday bread. And consumers are now more conscientious about sustainable sourcing and their impacts, their own personal impacts on the environment. And because of that, I think they're looking again towards more of these sustainable ingredients. And upcycling is a great way to remove waste from our supply chain and really to repurpose it and capture as much value as we can. So that's where we see a lot of that growth coming from in the future, is going mainstream, commercial aisle, going into channels such as food service, where we can have a really high volume throughputs there. And you're reaching a large number of consumers who are going to be interested in these attributes in terms of sustainability and health benefits.
Yeah, one other thing to add is what we found is we've really been very much led by consumers in our space. So in the sprouting space, to be quite honest, like we did not anticipate that we would have sort of the volume of production we have now when we started out. That just wasn't a plan. And it's just very bottom up. So it seems to be that consumers going to the grocery store are the ones that are sort of really pushing this movement forward. And I suspect the same will be true of upcycled ingredients as well, especially as it becomes more common and more recognizable with that certification program, things like that. I suspect it will be sort of the same kind of thing, which is always a great place to be when you're sort of in a space, you're just sort of being led along by your customers.
Well, before we run out of time, why Daniel and Diane, why don't you put in the Q&A section there, type in the links to your websites, or maybe in the chat function, wherever it's easier to put it in, so that people can follow up if they want to reach you and get more information on what you're specifically doing. Where are you located? You're up in Canada, Diane?
Yep, we're in Ontario, Canada.
Ontario, And Daniel, we know you're out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Michael, you're all over the world.
I'm specifically in Philadelphia, but
yeah, I know, and that, which is great for me because I get to see you when I go up there. Yeah. And then you also have your emissaries out there like Carl going around and finding sourdoughs all around the world. Let's end this session before we go to our informal, after party with a couple of questions that came in from Runner. Well, there's a few. Let me see. Well, one real quick one. Mike Avery. So, are you looking for new breweries to work with, Dan? Is that something, or do you have enough right now to keep you kind of loaded up?
We are pretty loaded up. However, around the world, beer is brewed and food is consumed everywhere, and so we're always, open to introductions to different breweries, and particularly, I think there's an opportunity for crossover between bakeries and food companies and breweries to potentially create some products together, allowing where we can help connect those dots too. So that's always very very interesting to us as well.
That's a good point. Okay, here's the questions from Runner. Puratos enrobe sour culture in many of their grain mixes. Is this also used in upcycled grains? And I'm not sure exactly what that means. Are they? Are you asking? Okay, can you enrobe? Can you embed, so to speak, sourdough culture in that grain and turn it into the base for sourdough starter?
So, I don't believe that anyone in our R&D team has tried to ferment the ReGrain product itself. I'm not sure how that would turn out because it's already gone through a fermentation stage brewing. So a lot of the sugars are gone that the microorganisms want.
Interesting.
But on our grains and seed categories, we do take grains and seeds, whole grains and seeds, and cook them in sourdough. There's no reason why we couldn't incorporate something like a ReGrain product in there to add that extra flavor and a bit more sustainability claims.
Add it to your to-do list, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, okay, part two. When upcycled grains are used, how does it read on a label? And that goes to a question that, Daniel, you answered one in writing that we didn't see what you wrote, but had to do with concerns people have with some of the things that might be in the upcycled grains that they might have sensitivities to and things like that.
Yeah, so on a label, this is it's going to vary by upcycled ingredient. For the upcycled brewer's grain, what we call ReGrain Super Grain Plus as our trade name. The parentheticals on that on a label are barley, wheat, and rye in our primary blend. So this is compositionally barley. It's barley, wheat, and rye. It's a clean label in that respect. Other ingredients, may be considered novel, formally from a regulatory perspective. And then the other question that I'd answered directly over it was about gluten, and the person who was writing in has celiacs, and this and there was a question. It was about putting these ingredients in products just for the sake of doing that, and my response was effectively that it's not about just putting these in just to use these grains up. Actually, the first and the primary reason is that they taste great and they've got great nutritional value. Yeah. For me, the primary reason might be to reduce the food waste, but we're happy for that to be a byproduct of folks just wanting to create products that are marketable and attractive for.
And it won't work from a market standpoint if it's only about the saving waste. If it doesn't taste good, people won't eat it if it doesn't taste good.
Yeah, and you don't want to yuck their yum by being like, hey, this is wasted bread. And by the way, it might be interesting to describe from the other end of
eat this for the sake of the planet.
It's not trash, but there's actually companies also that are recovering surplus bread from bakeries and then turning that back into beer too. Toastdale is a fun example of that. Yeah,
and even doing that, we heard I think last week, of taking old rye bread and turning it into more rye bread, by mashing it up. Final part of that question, there seems to be an education phase for the consumer. What is your approach to this and making it economically, I guess, viable for all, economic for all? So I think the education, which is what we're trying to do here. But I guess the question is, how do you get the word out? How do you educate the public in both of the areas that you guys are working in?
So we work with our bakery customers to help identify ways that they can better promote their products and take a new concept like this to a commercialization phase. And a lot of it is marketing, promoting heavily the concepts of upcycling and heavily promoting the concepts of sprouting and their health benefits. There's definitely a learning curve there. We face a similar curve with sourdough. We're fortunate enough to have the silver lining of the pandemic where so many people got involved with sourdough baking. And I think consumers are obsessed more now than ever with their health and with sustainability. So they're going to seek this information as well. So it's not just a push, it's a pull for consumers still.
Yeah. Basically, it's what is the upside of upcycling? And and it's a great story to tell. So now it's just a matter of finding creative ways of telling that story and getting it out there. And probably the best way to tell that story is to put out great products that utilize them. Daniel, what are some of the products? I know I've tasted some of the products that you guys make. Can you just let everybody know what some of the things you guys make?
Yeah, on the CPG side, that's a great opportunity. Because then you have a package, right, where you can talk about what's going on. And so we've done that in a few different categories. We did earlier this year. We had an edible bakeable cookie dough company that launched a product. We actually have a pasta launching probably next week. We've done some snack puffs ourselves and some nutrition bars in the past. Got projects with big and small companies and many different categories there. The other aspect of the education that's I think really key to hit on is that's part of why we helped create this certification program too, is to create a standard for this with third parties and verification steps involved, and create that trust and transparency around what this claim means. And that nonprofit that's operating as its own entity, one of their key tasks is to educate more broadly consumers about this. We hope to play a really key role in that in our consumer-facing work at ReGrain, and especially through our B2B work, through partnerships like with Puratos and so forth. But it's a process for sure to educate the market about these new ideas, and it's best done through collaboration across companies, across sectors. We did work with the USDA. We've done work with different nonprofits. We've done work with universities. So really just trying to get all the stakeholders, aligned across the value chain.
Well, it's exciting to see how organically both of your categories are growing as companies, because I know where you were at a few years ago and you didn't have all these coalitions going then. You were just starting to, you were seeking them out, and now it's happening. And I think those are all good signs, and the same things, happening with you, Diane, in your area. I did say last question, but I just want to, I think, good for the group here. How do you maintain consistency of product as your sources of recyclable material change? I know that's a challenge for you with the recycled beer grain.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I take it that's a question for me. So part of what we do right now, is for our processes, we're working exclusively with breweries that are producing packaged beer. So as much as I love consuming the neighborhood breweries weekly, experimental brew for my own consumption, that doesn't necessarily create the consistency of product that our friends in the bakery world, for example, want. And so by working with the beer making process it's effectively a food production process, right? So they need to source consistent materials that they use in consistent ways if they're making cans or bottles for distribution in a retail environment. So we're working with breweries, and we have certain specs, and you can kind of extrapolate from there. But that's a big part of it is not taking random experimental beers as much as we like drinking them, and focusing on the ones that are available at scale, that are available year round from producers that are doing so.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. I think it's we know all these small microbreweries are happening, but if you're going to put out a product, it's going to have to be, it can't be based on this week's batch of our favorite beer this week, beer of the week, but it can be done on a small scale. And I think maybe hopefully what you're doing will inspire other people to get into the same.
Yeah. And we were even inspired by brew pubs, around the country that have a history of using these grains in their own pizza crust, in their own burger buns. There's a history of decades of that happening at smaller scales. And yes. What we wanted to do is create a solution that's actually scalable for.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the challenges, as you enter into the commerce side. So before we sign off, everybody, check the chat line. A lot of links are there for you, and contact for follow-up, because we really just again, only scratched the surface of all the things that both Diane and Daniel are working on, and questions that haven't yet been answered. But if you can join us now in the after party, what we'll do is we'll log out of this webinar and log back in on the other link that we were sent to get us into the VIP lounge. And those of you who are watching who have the VIP ticket can navigate over to the VIP lounge and join us there. We'll take a few minute break here and reconvene in the VIP lounge. And
I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
I guess I forgot to turn off my phone. But I want to thank you again, Daniel Kurzrock, Diane Walters, and Michael Gleason for a great presentation, for really kind of, filling this hour with really wonderful, useful, and inspiring information and I can't wait to see the next time we regather, how much more growth is happening, because I think you're both in a growth industry that's making a difference in the world. And I think that's part of what maybe, and that's why Puratos really wants to champion it, is because you also are trying to, find ways to make this world a better place. So thank you again for all your work. Thank you all for joining us. Those who can join us in the VIP lounge, we'll see you there in a couple of minutes. And remember, next week, we've got Mark Vetri, Claire Kopp, and David Joachim talking about mastering bread from the standpoint of flour and regionally specific and high extraction flours. And we have also on Wednesday a presentation on the future of technology, and it will just keep coming. So we'll see you all at the next Bread Symposium next week, and I'll see you guys in a couple of minutes in the VIP lounge. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Our event technical and production partners, Ganoid Communications, including our producer, Gurmit Singh, and his team, Jita Gajaria, Gagandeep Singh, and Jaydev Kashari. Thanks also to Ted Nelson and Lael Fretzel of our creative and marketing team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University who supported me throughout this event. My executive assistant, Sarah Standifer, Communications Director, Melinda Law, Chancellor, Mim Rooney, Charlotte Campus President, Cheryl Richards, and our executive team leaders, deans and faculty, Maureen Dumas, Michael Schrader, Michelle Nicholas, Mark Norman, Brent Steyerwalt, Laurie Heimbach, Jerry Lanuza, Amy Felder, Harry Paymiller, Richard Miskovich, and many, many others. Thank you all.